Picture this, dear friend, a late summer afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy with the scent of lavender and sun-warmed soil. You settle into a creaky old chair on the porch, a chipped mug of sweet tea in your hands. Out beyond the railing, the garden isn't perfect, and that's exactly what makes it beautiful. A crooked stone path winds past clumps of daisies, an old wheelbarrow brimming with petunias, and a wooden fence silvered by years of rain and sun. There's no rush here, no pressure to keep every weed at bay. It's a space that feels lived in, loved, and in a way it tells your story. That's the charm of rustic gardening. It whispers of the past while welcoming the present. Today, I want to share how you can capture that same warmth and timeless comfort in your own backyard, no matter its size. Even if your budget is slim or your knees don't bend like they used to, there are ways to make your outdoor space a true sanctuary. Do you remember the old barn on the edge of town? The one with boards so worn they looked like they could tell 100 stories. That's the kind of feeling weathered wood brings into a garden. It doesn't shout for attention. It simply belongs as if it's been there forever. Reclaimed wood, whether from an old fence, a dismantled shed, or even the side of a forgotten crate, carries that same quiet grace. When you bring it into your garden, you're not just using a material, you're carrying forward a history. One neighbor of mine, Martha, had a pile of old fence posts she thought were fit only for the burn pile. Instead, she used them to edge her herb garden. She left the tops uneven so each post had its own height and shape. A little thyme spilling over here, some mint climbing through there, it became a scene that looked as if it had grown naturally over decades. Every guest who visits her now asks about those posts, and she always smiles, saying they've been in the neighborhood longer than I have. The beauty of reclaimed wood is how forgiving it is. If you can't saw a perfectly straight line, no problem. Rustic style embraces the crooked and the worn. You can make raised beds from old pallets, simple benches from leftover planks, or even a small potting table from a rescued door propped on 2 sturdy crates. None of it has to be new. In fact, the older it looks, the more character it brings. And here's the thing, for those of us who don't have the same strength we used to, you don't need to haul huge beams or build something complicated. Even a single weathered board can become a backdrop for a row of potted plants. You can lean it against a wall and hang old metal hooks for your watering can, garden gloves, or sun hat. Not only is it beautiful, but it keeps your tools right where you can reach them without bending or stretching. There's also something deeply grounding about working with materials that have been touched by time. When you see the grain of the wood darkened from years in the sun, or run your fingers over a surface smoothed by rain, it reminds you that beauty often comes from enduring the seasons. Just like us, wood softens, changes, and tells its own quiet story as the years pass. That's the spirit of rustic gardening, not perfection, but presence. So if you find yourself with an old fence panel, a worn-out table, or even just a weathered wooden crate, don't toss it aside. Let it become part of your garden's next chapter. After all, it's the history, not the shine, that makes a space feel like home. Think back to the last time you wandered through a thrift store or a flea market. Maybe you were just browsing, not really looking for anything, when your eyes landed on something unexpected, a dented watering can, a rust-speckled lantern, or a wooden ladder with one missing rung. Most people might see junk, but in the right light, these pieces can become the heart of a rustic garden. Vintage items hold a certain magic. They carry whispers of the hands that once used them, and when placed among your plants, they turn a simple outdoor space into a storybook scene. I once knew a retired teacher named Helen who had a knack for spotting treasures others overlooked. On a rainy Saturday, she came home from the local Goodwill with an old wheelbarrow, the kind with a solid iron wheel and peeling green paint. It wobbled a little and couldn't haul much anymore, but Helen saw something else in it. She filled it with potting soil, planted cascading petunias in shades of pink and purple, and rolled it to the center of her yard. Within weeks, it was a riot of blooms spilling over the edges, looking for all the world like they had been there for decades. That wheelbarrow became her garden's centerpiece, and every spring she replanted it like an old friend getting a new dress. What's wonderful about vintage finds is that they ask so little from us. You don't have to repaint them unless you want to. You don't have to hide their dings or polish away the rust. In fact, those imperfections are part of their charm. A chipped enamel basin makes a perfect planter for herbs. An old ladder can be leaned against a fence and draped with trailing vines. Even a cracked teapot can hold a cluster of succulents, creating a whimsical little vignette. And for those of us who prefer to avoid heavy-lifting, vintage garden decor is often light and easy to arrange. A wooden crate planted with marigolds can be carried right to your porch. An old metal bucket can be set on a table to create a raised planting spot so you don't have to bend down. You can even hang smaller pieces like a set of mismatched teacups or old kitchen sifters from a pergola beam to make a playful wind chime that rattles gently in the breeze. The key is to choose items that speak to you, pieces that feel like they belong in your story. Rustic gardening isn't about following a strict design plan. It's about surrounding yourself with objects that make you smile every time you pass them. And the beauty of vintage finds is that they rarely cost much. A trip to the thrift store, or rummage through your garage, or even a neighbor's yard sale might give you the perfect finishing touch. In the end, these treasures don't just decorate your garden, they make it yours. There's something almost timeless about the sound of your shoes crunching over a stone path, each step guiding you deeper into your garden. Stone has a way of grounding a space. It feels sturdy, enduring, and connected to the earth in a way no synthetic material ever could. When paired with wildflowers, the effect is pure magic. The stones provide structure while the flowers soften the edges, creating a scene that feels like it's been waiting there for years, just for you to discover. I once visited a small cottage garden tucked behind an old farmhouse. The owner, a widower named Samuel, had laid every stone by hand over the course of a summer. They weren't perfect in shape or size. Some were flat and smooth, others chunky and uneven, but that only made the path more charming. Along each side, wildflowers had been allowed to grow freely: black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, and a few sprigs of Queen Anne's lace. The colors shifted with the seasons, from spring pastels to bold summer blooms, and finally to the golden tones of autumn. Samuel told me that he never planned the flowers. He simply scattered seeds and let nature do the arranging. Creating a rustic stone pathway doesn't require perfection or a mason's skill. Even if you're working alone or can't lift heavy stones, you can start small. Use just a few flat stepping stones to lead from your patio to your favorite bench. Lay them in grass, or for less maintenance, in a bed of mulch or gravel. If bending is a challenge, you can have the stones delivered close to where you want them, so you only need to shift them slightly into place. The joy of rustic style is that it forgives uneven spacing and embraces a little wobble. It looks intentional, like nature had a hand in the design. Wildflowers are the perfect companions for these paths because they ask so little from us in return. Many thrive on neglect, needing only a bit of sun and occasional water. You can buy mixed seed packets, toss them along the edges of your path, and wait for the magic to unfold. As the blooms fill in, they'll spill over the stones, blurring the line between garden and walkway. It's an ever-changing picture, a living painting that evolves with each passing week. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about a stone path lined with wildflowers is the way it changes the pace of your walk. You don't rush along it, you meander, noticing each new bloom, each change in the light. It invites you to slow down, to appreciate the journey as much as the destination. That's the heart of rustic gardening, creating a space where time seems to move more gently and every step feels like part of a story. There's a special kind of pride in looking out at your garden and knowing you built part of it with your own two hands. It doesn't have to be perfect, polished, or complicated. In fact, the beauty of rustic garden structures is that they can be made from the simplest of materials, even scraps that might otherwise end up in the trash. Trellises and benches are two wonderful examples of this, and they're easier to make than most people think. A few summers ago, my friend Linda decided she wanted a trellis for her sweet peas. She didn't buy anything fancy, just gathered fallen branches from her yard after a storm. She trimmed them to roughly the same length, tied them together at the top with twine, and crisscrossed more sticks along the sides. By the time her sweet peas started climbing, the trellis looked like it had grown there naturally. When the flowers bloomed in pinks and purples, they turned that humble structure into something straight out of a countryside painting. For those who prefer something sturdier, wooden pallets are a rustic gardener's secret treasure. Many stores give them away for free, and with just a little imagination, they can become benches, tables, or plant stands. I once saw a couple in their 70s turn 2 pallets and a few concrete blocks into a garden bench. They didn't bother sanding every edge smooth, they simply brushed off the dirt, stacked the blocks to create legs, and placed the pallets on top. A few old cushions made it comfortable, and suddenly they had a perfect place for morning coffee among the roses. The joy of building your own pieces isn't just in saving money. It's in shaping something that fits your space and your life exactly. You can make a low bench so you don't have to climb up to sit. You can make a trellis wide enough for climbing roses, but narrow enough to move easily if needed. And because rustic style embraces imperfections, there's no pressure to hide every nail mark or straighten every board. Those little quirks are part of the charm. Even for those with limited mobility, these projects can be done at a gentle pace. You can gather your materials over several days, work in short bursts, and rest when you need to. By the time you're done, you'll not only have a functional piece for your garden, but also the satisfaction of knowing you brought it to life. When the sun catches the curve of a vine winding up your handmade trellis, or when you sit down on a bench you built yourself, there's a deep sense of connection to your space. It's more than just a garden at that point. It's a reflection of your hands, your creativity, and your willingness to make beauty with what you have. And that, dear friend, is the essence of rustic gardening. If wood is the warm heartbeat of a rustic garden, then galvanized metal is its steady rhythm. There's something wonderfully humble about an old tub or bucket, simple, sturdy, and honest. These pieces were once tools of hard work, holding water for washing clothes, feeding animals, or carrying harvests. Today, they can have a gentler purpose, cradling flowers and herbs while adding a silvery sparkle to your garden. I remember visiting my Aunt Ruth's farm when I was a child. Near the kitchen door, she kept a row of battered metal tubs, each one planted with something different: basil, mint, cherry tomatoes, and a riot of nasturtiums spilling over the edges. She liked them because they were easy to move when the weather turned, and they didn't crack like clay pots in the frost. But more than that, she said they reminded her of her mother, who had scrubbed laundry in a tub just like them under the shade of an oak tree. Galvanized tubs and buckets are surprisingly practical for gardeners of all abilities. They're lightweight compared to stone planters, which means you can shift them into the sun or shade without straining. If bending low to the ground is hard, you can place them on an old bench stack, too, for extra height. Or even mount smaller buckets along a fence so your plants grow at waist level. That way, tending to your flowers or herbs becomes a pleasure, not a chore. You can plant almost anything in them. Imagine a deep tub filled with lavender, its soft purple blooms nodding in the breeze, or a pair of buckets overflowing with bright geraniums flanking your porch steps. Herbs are especially happy in these containers because the metal warms quickly in the sun, encouraging growth. Just be sure to drill a few drainage holes in the bottom. You want your plants to drink, but not sit in water. The beauty of galvanized metal is that it doesn't demand polish or upkeep. In fact, a little rust along the rim or a few dents in the side only add to its story. You can even find tubs and buckets for just a few dollars at flea markets or estate sales. And if you're lucky enough to inherit one from a family member, it becomes more than just a container. It becomes a piece of your own history woven into your garden. When the light of late afternoon catches the curve of a metal tub and the flowers inside are lit like a painting, you'll see why these simple objects are so beloved. They remind us that beauty doesn't have to be fragile or fancy. Sometimes it's the things built to last and the hands that reuse them that bring the most warmth to a garden. When the sun dips low and the garden shifts from day to evening, lighting becomes the soul of the space. A rustic garden isn't just about how it looks in daylight, it's about the magic that comes alive when shadows lengthen and soft light begins to dance between leaves. Lanterns, string lights, and glowing mason jars can turn even the simplest corner into a place that feels warm, inviting, and almost enchanted. I'll never forget an evening at my friend Clara's home. She had invited a few of us for tea in her backyard, nothing fancy, just a summer get-together. As twilight came, she quietly lit a collection of lanterns along her stone pathway. Some were tall and elegant, others squat and dented, each holding a flickering candle. Overhead, strands of warm white string lights were draped from one tree to another, casting a gentle golden glow over our table. And on the small side table sat 3 mason jars filled with tiny battery-powered fairy lights, their glow reflecting off the glass like captured fireflies. We all lingered far longer than planned, wrapped in that soft light. and the feeling that we had stepped into another time. Lighting like this doesn't require expensive fixtures or complicated wiring. For those who prefer easy projects, battery-operated candles inside lanterns give the same flicker as real flames without the worry. String lights can be hung along a fence, around a pergola, or even wound gently through the branches of a tree. Mason jars, those humble kitchen staples, can be transformed into glowing orbs by dropping in a handful of LED fairy lights. You can hang them from hooks, set them on tables, or line them along a garden path. If lifting ladders or climbing isn't possible, you can still create beautiful lighting at arm's reach. Place lanterns at ground level, wrap lights around railings, or hang mason jars from a shepherd's hook planted in the soil. The key is to layer your light a little glow here, a soft flicker there, so your garden feels like it's wrapped in a warm blanket. And here's the quiet truth about evening light: it changes how we experience our garden. In the daytime, we see colors, shapes, and textures. But at night, it's all about feeling. The soft glow invites conversation. It makes the air feel thicker with comfort. It turns a bench into a perfect place for a whispered story or a silent moment of gratitude. So the next time you find yourself outside as the sky deepens into indigo, light a lantern or two. Watch how the garden transforms, how it becomes less about the plants themselves and more about the way they hold and shape the light. That's the secret to rustic garden evenings. It's not just about seeing, it's about feeling. Some gardens are beautiful because of their flowers, while others tell a story through the objects they hold. Repurposed farm tools are a perfect example. Once they were the backbone of hard work: shovels, rakes, hoes, and scythes that dug into the soil and brought in the harvest. Today, they can have a second life, standing as both decoration and a quiet tribute to the hands that once used them. I remember visiting a rural bed and breakfast in Vermont, where the owner had transformed her grandparents' farm tools into a gallery of sorts. Along the side of the barn, she had mounted an old pitchfork next to a rusted spade, each one weathered by years of use. Between them hung a metal watering can filled with trailing ivy, its leaves spilling down like green ribbons. In the garden, an old wheel hoe stood among a bed of black-eyed Susans, not to work the soil anymore, but to keep watch over the blooms. Guests loved wandering the property, finding little surprises. A wooden rake leaning against a fence, a scythe hung high like a piece of sculpture. Using tools as decor doesn't mean losing their function entirely. A sturdy shovel head can be set into the ground and used as a plant marker, its blade painted with the name of your garden bed. A pitchfork can support climbing beans or morning glories. Even a broken hoe handle can be cut down and used as a rustic stake for potted plants. For those of us who value ease and accessibility, this kind of garden art is wonderfully simple. Most farm tools are tall enough to be seen from a distance, so you don't have to bend to appreciate them. You can lean them against walls, prop them in corners, or even arrange them in large planters for an eye-catching display. If they're rusty or splintered, all the better. It only adds to the rustic charm. Repurposed tools also spark conversation. Visitors often pause to ask about them, and that's when the stories come out about the summer you borrowed a neighbor's rake and forgot to give it back, or the hoe your grandfather used for decades before it broke. These objects become bridges to the past, linking today's garden to the hands and hearts that shaped the land before us. There's a certain poetry in letting something retire with dignity. Instead of hiding old tools away in a shed or tossing them out, you're giving them a new role, one that honors their history while adding character to your garden. In a world that moves so quickly, that kind of respect for what came before is a gentle reminder beauty is often found in what's been used, loved, and made to last. There's something deeply satisfying about a garden bed that's neatly contained, yet still feels like part of the natural landscape. Raised beds, especially when built from rustic materials like weathered wood or reclaimed crates, strike that perfect balance. They bring plants closer to your reach, keep things organized, and add a warm, old-fashioned charm that feels at home in any outdoor space. A few years back, I visited a small-town community garden where one of the older members, George, had designed his plot entirely from old apple crates. He'd found them stacked behind a local orchard, the wood gray and soft from years in the sun. Instead of cutting or reshaping them, he simply lined each crate with burlap, filled them with soil, and arranged them in rows. Herbs grew in some, lettuce and kale in others, and the ends of the crates were stenciled with the orchard's faded logo. It was as if each plant had its own little cabin, and walking between them felt like touring a tiny leafy village. Raised beds are especially kind to gardeners who want to work without straining their backs or knees. By elevating the soil, you can plant weed and harvest without constant bending. Crates work beautifully for this. They're often just the right height, and you can stack them if you want more lift. For larger raised beds, rough-hewn planks or salvaged boards can create frames that look as though they've always been part of the landscape. Even mismatched boards have their charm. Rustic style thrives on imperfection. You don't need a large yard to make this work. A few stacked crates on a sunny balcony can hold enough herbs and greens for fresh salads all summer. On a patio, a single raised bed can become a mini cutting garden for zinnias, marigolds, and cosmos. If mobility is a concern, placing raised beds close to a water source means less hauling of hoses or watering cans. What I love most about rustic raised beds and crate gardens is how they invite creativity. You can mix materials, maybe a bed framed with old barnwood, another built from corrugated metal, and a row of crates painted in soft, muted colors. You can tuck in a few decorative touches like a small sign with a hand-painted plant name or a flat stone with a carved design. And because each bed is contained, it's easy to keep things tidy without losing that gentle, relaxed feel. When you stand at the edge of a raised bed, brushing your hand over the tops of the plants, you're not just tending a garden. You're caring for a space you've shaped with your own vision and needs in mind. It's a reminder that gardening is as much about comfort and joy as it is about the harvest. And in a rustic garden, those two things often grow side by side. A rustic garden isn't only for planting and tending. It's for sitting, breathing, and simply being. And nothing says welcome quite like a cozy seating area, especially one with mismatched chairs, benches, and tables gathered over time. There's a special kind of beauty in furniture that doesn't match each piece with its own history, its own quirks coming together to create a space that feels lived in and loved. I once visited a friend named Jean, whose garden had a little corner shaded by a grapevine-covered pergola. Her furniture set was anything but matching: an old rocking chair she'd found at a yard sale, a wrought iron bench with peeling paint, and two sturdy wooden chairs from her parents' kitchen. A small round table, a repurposed sewing machine base topped with a slab of reclaimed wood, sat in the center. The chairs wore cushions in different fabrics and patterns, but somehow it all felt perfectly harmonious. She told me that guests often lingered there longer than they intended, lulled by the soft sway of the grape leaves overhead and the comfort of seats that had welcomed many before them. Creating a mismatched seating area is a joy for anyone who loves the hunt for unique pieces. You don't need to buy new. Thrift stores, flea markets, and even roadside finds can offer gems. A weathered bench might pair beautifully with a wicker chair, and an old milking stool can serve as a handy side table. The imperfections, a scratch here, a faded cushion there, are what make it charming. For those with limited mobility, it's worth choosing seats with sturdy arms and solid backs, making it easier to stand up and sit down comfortably. Adding thick, weather-resistant cushions can make any seat more inviting, and they're an easy way to introduce color and pattern to the space. You can also arrange your seating to suit your needs, perhaps in a circle for conversation or facing a favorite view of your garden. The key to mismatched charm is not forcing uniformity. Let each piece bring its own personality to the group. Over time, the collection will grow and change, just like your garden. You might swap a chair for a bench or add a small table when you find just the right one. Each change adds another layer to the story your garden tells. When you sink into a chair in such a space with a cup of tea in hand and the scent of flowers drifting by, you realize that perfection was never the goal. Comfort, warmth, and the quiet joy of being surrounded by things and plants you love. That's the real treasure. There's a certain joy in sharing your garden with more than just plants. Birds bring life, music, and movement, turning even the quietest corner into a place of gentle activity. Rustic birdhouses, feeders, and baths not only welcome them in, but also add character and charm to your outdoor space. Over time, these small touches can transform your garden into a haven for feathered visitors and a sanctuary for you as well. I once spent a summer visiting my neighbor Ruth's porch nearly every morning. She had a cluster of handmade birdhouses mounted along her fence, each one different, some built from scraps of barnwood, others from old tin cans or teapots. A shallow stone bird bath sat under the shade of a lilac bush where robins and sparrows splashed in the cool water. She kept a rustic wooden feeder filled year-round, and she knew every regular visitor by sight. "That cardinal comes for breakfast at exactly 8, she'd say, smiling as if she were speaking of an old friend. The beauty of rustic bird accessories is that they can be as simple or elaborate as you wish. A weathered gourd with a small entrance hole can serve as a home for wrens. A chipped enamel bowl set on a stand makes a perfectly charming bird bath. Even a bundle of twigs tied with twine and hung from a branch can offer shelter in the winter. If you prefer easy maintenance, choose feeders that are easy to refill and clean without bending or lifting too much. Placement is important both for the bird's safety and for your enjoyment. Birdhouses should be tucked in quiet spots away from too much foot traffic, while feeders and baths are best placed where you can watch them from a window or your favorite chair. This way you can enjoy the show without disturbing your guests. For those with limited mobility, a hanging feeder on a shepherd's hook or a raised bird bath makes tending easier. You can even cluster birdhouses at varying heights on a single post for a layered, eye-catching display. Over time, weather will give these pieces a soft-age patina that blends beautifully with the rest of your garden. And perhaps the most wonderful thing about inviting birds into your space is the sense of companionship it brings. On days when the world feels still, a flash of color at the feeder or the sound of a gentle song can lift your heart. In a rustic garden, these moments remind us that beauty isn't only in what we grow, it's in what we welcome. There's something irresistible about furniture and decor that looks like it has lived a life before finding its way into your garden. Distressed paint and time-worn finishes bring that feeling instantly, the soft peeling of old layers, the faded hues kissed by sun and rain, the kind of patina you can't buy brand new no matter how hard you try. These surfaces whisper of seasons gone by and add warmth that's hard to fake. My friend Clara has a small side table that perfectly captures this charm. She found it at a yard sale, its original white paint chipped away to reveal soft blues and bare wood beneath. Instead of sanding and repainting, she left it exactly as it was, sealing it just enough to protect it from further damage. Now it sits beside her garden bench, holding a potted geranium and a stack of gardening magazines. Every guest who sits there runs their fingers over the tabletop, drawn to its texture like a familiar old quilt. You can create this look in many ways. Some pieces arrive in your life already perfectly aged, perhaps a chair from your childhood home or a bench you've had for decades. Others can be gently distressed with sandpaper, steel wool, or even the natural wear of outdoor living. Painted wood exposed to the elements will fade and chip over time, revealing layers of color that tell their own story. For those who prefer to avoid heavy projects, small items work just as well. A flower box with weathered paint, a lantern with a touch of rust, or a metal watering can with worn edges can all contribute to the look. You don't need to overhaul your whole garden. Sometimes a single well-loved piece is enough to set the tone. Distressed finishes also pair beautifully with plants. Soft greens and bright blooms stand out against muted age surfaces, making the colors seem richer and more vibrant. A chipped turquoise chair with a pot of yellow marigolds or a faded red bench surrounded by ivy becomes a picture worth pausing for. The best part is that this style asks nothing of you except to let time do its work. Instead of polishing away every imperfection, you welcome them. Instead of rushing to repaint, you watch as nature leaves its gentle marks. In a way, distressed paint is like a record of the seasons. Each layer, each crack a reminder that beauty often deepens as years pass. When you sit in a garden filled with these time-worn treasures, you can feel their quiet history surrounding you. And as you run your hand over their surfaces, you might realize that, like them, we've weathered the years and are all the more beautiful for it. Few things fit more naturally into a rustic garden than an old barrel. Whether once used for wine, whiskey, or rainwater barrels, carry with them a sense of craftsmanship and history. Their rounded shape and sturdy build make them wonderfully versatile. They can become tables, planters, or even charming water features that bring a gentle sound to your space. I once visited a vineyard that had transformed its retired wine barrels into outdoor tables. The tops were smoothed and sealed, but the sides still bore the marks of age stains from the wine iron bands streaked with rust. Set under a pergola, they were surrounded by mismatched stools, and each table held a small pot of rosemary or lavender. Guests lingered there, sipping drinks and enjoying the scent of herbs in the air. It felt effortlessly welcoming, as though the barrels had simply found a second life without leaving the vineyard. In the home garden, barrels can be adapted in countless ways. Cut one in half, and you have two large planters perfect for shrubs, tomatoes, or cascading flowers. Keep one whole, and it can serve as a rustic table beside your favorite chair. Add a round piece of glass or wood on top, and you've got a smooth surface for drinks or books while still keeping that barrel charm. If you love the soothing sound of water, a barrel makes an excellent base for a fountain. You can fit a simple pump inside, letting water trickle from a spout, or spill over stones into the barrel's basin. For those with limited mobility, placing the fountain at waist height makes it easy to maintain without stooping. Plus, the sound of water can transform even a small garden into a place of calm and reflection. Barrels are also practical. They can collect rainwater for garden use, reducing your reliance on hoses. A barrel tucked near a downspout with a spigot at the base can save countless trips to the faucet, especially if you use smaller watering cans or fill a nearby bucket. Part of their appeal is that barrels never look out of place. Their neutral tones and natural wood grain blend beautifully with flowers, stone, and greenery. Over time, the wood will silver in the sun, the metal will deepen in patina, and the whole piece will settle into the garden as if it had always been there. In a rustic space, an old barrel isn't just a container or a table. It's a reminder of the value in keeping what's sturdy and letting it serve again. And as it stands in your garden holding blooms, drinks, or flowing water, it quietly tells that story to anyone who visits. There's a certain romance in walking beneath an arbor heavy with blooms or sitting under the dappled shade of a pergola. These garden structures don't just provide shelter from the sun, they frame the space, guiding the eye upward and creating a sense of enclosure that makes a garden feel like a room without walls. In a rustic setting, they're often built from simple materials and softened over time by the plants that embrace them. I remember visiting a small countryside inn where the entrance was marked by a weathered wooden arbor. Every summer, climbing roses wound their way up each post and spilled over the top in cascades of pink and cream. Guests would pause before walking through, not just to admire the flowers, but because the archway felt like a threshold into another world. The owner told me she had built it herself from reclaimed barnwood, never bothering to sand away the rough edges. The roses do the decorating, she said with a smile. Pergolas offer a similar magic, but on a larger scale. With 4 posts and a crossbeam roof, they create a shaded retreat perfect for a table and chairs or a pair of comfortable loungers. In a rustic garden, the beams might be thick, hand-hewn logs or simple untreated lumber that weathers to a silvery gray. Vines like wisteria, honeysuckle, or even grapevines can be trained to climb the posts and weave through the overhead slats, giving you not just shade, but fragrance and seasonal color. For those with limited mobility, a pergola or arbor can bring plants right up to your level. Instead of bending to tend to ground-level beds, you can prune, train, and admire blooms while standing or sitting comfortably. These structures also provide support for hanging baskets or lanterns, adding to their versatility. Building one doesn't have to be complicated. A simple arbor can be assembled from just a few sturdy posts and crosspieces, and even a modest pergola can be created with basic tools. If heavy lifting isn't possible, you might enlist a friend or family member to help with the frame, then enjoy the pleasure of planting and decorating it yourself. The real magic happens as seasons pass. Wood takes on a soft patina, vines grow thicker, and the whole structure feels like it has always belonged. When you sit beneath a pergola on a warm afternoon with light filtering through leaves and the air scented by blossoms, you understand why these features have been part of gardens for centuries. They don't just add beauty, they create a place to linger, to talk, and to breathe. Few things say welcome quite like a basket overflowing with flowers. There's a warmth to woven baskets, the texture of the fibers, the way they curve naturally, that makes them feel right at home in a rustic garden. They remind us of simpler times when baskets carried fresh vegetables from the garden or wildflowers from a morning walk. Now they can bring that same charm to your porch, patio, or garden path. I once visited a small lakeside cottage where the porch rail was lined with woven baskets of all shapes and sizes. Some hung from sturdy hooks, others rested on old stools or wooden crates. One basket held trailing lobelia in a waterfall of blue, another was packed tight with cheerful yellow pansies, and yet another spilled with fragrant lavender. The homeowner told me she switched out the flowers with the season's mums and autumn evergreens in winter, so the baskets were never empty. Using baskets for plants is wonderfully versatile. You can line them with burlap or a plastic liner to hold soil, or simply drop in a potted plant for easy changes. For those who want to avoid heavy lifting, smaller baskets can be arranged at table height or hung from railings so the blooms are right at eye level. Hanging baskets can frame an entryway, while larger floor baskets can soften the corners of a patio. What makes baskets so appealing is their adaptability. They can be as neat or as wild as you like. A tightly packed arrangement of petunias feels cottage perfect, while a loose mix of wildflowers and greenery looks as if it were gathered fresh from the meadow. And unlike rigid planters, baskets have a warmth in their very texture, whether they're made from willow rattan or even repurposed rope. Baskets also allow for quick changes when inspiration strikes. You might swap out spring tulips for summer begonias, or add a few sprigs of fresh herbs to a basket near your kitchen door. They're easy to move when you want to refresh your space or protect delicate plants from a sudden frost. Over time, the baskets themselves will weather, softening in color and texture, and that's part of their beauty in a rustic garden. Even when they're a little frayed or faded, they carry the memory of seasons past. Standing in such a space, surrounded by blooms held in these humble containers, you can't help but feel a quiet sense of homecoming, as if each basket has been waiting just for you. Old signs have a way of catching the eye and stirring the heart, especially when they carry the faded lettering and gentle wear of years gone by. In a rustic garden, vintage signage can be both decorative and functional, marking a path, naming a planting bed, or simply adding a touch of whimsy. Whether it's a hand-painted board you've made yourself or a piece rescued from a flea market, these signs bring personality and storytelling into your outdoor space. I once visited a roadside farm stand in the Midwest where the owner had dotted her garden with old signs she'd collected over the years. A faded fresh eggs board leaned against the chicken coop. An enamel tomatoes sign rested near the vegetable patch, and a weathered arrow pointed toward the orchard. None of them matched, and that was the charm. Each sign felt like a snippet of a story from another time. Making your own hand-painted signs can be a delightful and accessible project. You don't need perfect handwriting or an artistic background. A scrap of wood, a bit of leftover paint, and a steady afternoon are all it takes. Words can be as simple as "Herb's welcome" or "garden," or you might add a favorite quote to greet visitors. For those who prefer not to bend or stoop, signs can be mounted on stakes at waist height or hung on walls and fences. If you enjoy the thrill of a treasure hunt, keep an eye out for old advertising boards, enamel plaques, or metal farm signs at yard sales and thrift stores. Even signs with rust-chipped paint or faded lettering blend beautifully into a rustic garden, their imperfections adding authenticity. Signage can also serve practical purposes. Marking plant varieties, identifying seating areas, or labeling tool storage not only adds charm, but also helps keep things organized. In community gardens, hand-painted boards can mark individual plots, giving each gardener a personal touch in the shared space. What I love about vintage and handmade signs is the way they spark conversation. Visitors often stop to read them, ask where they came from, or share memories of similar pieces from their own past. Each sign becomes a little storyteller, connecting your garden to a wider world of people and places. Over time, the signs themselves will weather and fade, but rather than diminishing their beauty, it deepens it. Much like the garden around them, they will change with the seasons, a little more worn, a little more softened, until they seem as much a part of the space as the flowers and trees. And when you walk among them, you'll feel surrounded not just by plants, but by stories. There's something timeless about sitting around a fire as the evening cools. The flicker of flames, the soft crackle of wood, the way light dances across familiar faces, it all invites conversation and comfort. In a rustic garden, a stone fire pit can become the heart of the space, drawing people together in every season. I once spent an autumn evening in my cousin Henry's backyard, where he had built a simple fire pit from stacked river stones. It wasn't perfect or polished. The stones were uneven, some moss-covered, others chipped, but that only made it more beautiful. A circle of mismatched chairs surrounded it, and on the table nearby sat a basket of wool blankets for guests to wrap themselves in. As night fell, we roasted marshmallows, sipped cider, and watched sparks float into the dark sky. The fire kept us warm, but it was the company and the setting that made the night unforgettable. Building a rustic fire pit doesn't require heavy machinery or a large budget. For those who prefer light labor, even a small contained design can be made with stacked stones or bricks arranged in a circle. Pre-made metal inserts can keep the fire safely contained and make cleanup easier. If mobility is a concern, the seating can be arranged so that guests don't have to navigate uneven ground, and the pit itself can be raised slightly to reduce bending when tending the fire. A fire pit offers more than just warmth. In spring, it's the perfect spot to enjoy cool evenings. In summer, it extends the hours you can spend outdoors. In autumn, it makes the crisp air feel welcoming rather than chilly. Even in winter, a fire pit can create a gathering place for hot drinks and quiet conversation under the stars. Adding a few rustic touches around the pit enhances the atmosphere, perhaps a ring of stones set into the ground, lanterns placed on nearby logs, or a rough-hewn wooden bench draped with a throw. Keep firewood stacked neatly nearby in a vintage metal bin or an old crate, and the space will always be ready for an impromptu gathering. What I love most about a fire pit is its ability to slow time. People tend to linger when there's a fire drawn by its glow, and the feeling that the world beyond can wait a little while. It turns your garden into a place where stories are told, laughter is shared, and moments are savored. And in a rustic setting, it feels like the fire has always been there, a quiet, steady presence at the center of the garden's life. An old door standing in the middle of a garden might sound strange at first, but in a rustic space, it feels like a portal to another world. Likewise, a weathered window frame stripped of its glass can become a frame for flowers, vines, or even the open sky. These pieces, rescued from houses that no longer stand or from flea market stalls, bring instant character and a sense of mystery to your outdoor space. I once visited a friend named Louise who had leaned a pale green paint-chipped door against her garden fence. She'd mounted a small wooden shelf halfway up the door, just wide enough for a pot of red geraniums. Above it, she had hung an old iron doorknob purely for decoration, though it looked as though you could turn it and step into another place entirely. Nearby, an empty window frame hung from a tree branch, framing the view of her wildflower patch like a living painting. Using doors and windows in the garden doesn't require heavy work. They can be propped against walls, fences, or even staked gently into the soil for stability. If bending or lifting is a concern, smaller frames are easier to handle and can be hung at eye level. You can leave the wood bare to weather naturally or paint it in soft, muted colors to match your space. Doors and windows can also serve functional roles. A solid old door can act as a windbreak for delicate plants, while a large window frame fitted with wire mesh can support climbing vines like sweet peas or morning glories. For those who enjoy seasonal decorating, these pieces make perfect backdrops for wreaths, hanging baskets, or strings of lights. The beauty lies in how they blend the past with the present. Every chip in the paint, every rusted hinge hints at a story who might have passed through that door or looked out that window. In a rustic garden, these pieces remind us that life is layered. The old makes way for the new, but still leaves its mark. When the afternoon sun filters through an empty window frame, casting patterned shadows on the grass, or when a climbing rose drapes itself over the edge of an old door, the effect is both nostalgic and quietly magical. It's as if your garden has found a way to hold on to time, inviting the past to linger alongside the flowers of today. There's something deeply soothing about the gentle sway of a swing or hammock in the garden. These pieces invite you to slow down, to feel the breeze on your skin, and to simply be present. In a rustic setting, wooden swings and fabric hammocks become more than just seating. They're places where memories are made. I remember visiting my grandmother's old farmhouse as a child. A wide wooden swing hung from the sturdy branch of an oak tree in the front yard. The seat was worn smooth from years of use, and the ropes creaked slightly with every sway. We'd sit there on warm afternoons, sipping lemonade and watching the world go by. It wasn't just a swing. It was a gathering place for quiet talks, daydreams, and the occasional giggle when someone pushed a little too high. In a garden today, a rustic swing can be as simple as a wooden plank seat hung from thick rope, or as elaborate as a bench-style swing under a pergola. Hammocks, too, come in many styles, from hand-woven cotton to durable weather-resistant fabrics, and can be strung between trees posts, or even mounted on a freestanding frame for flexibility. For those with limited mobility, these can still be accessible. A bench swing with a solid back and armrests offers support, making it easier to sit and stand. Hammocks with spreader bars keep the fabric open, so getting in and out feels less like balancing on a wobbly cloud. Placing them at a comfortable height and in a shaded spot ensures they're inviting at any time of day. Rustic swings and hammocks also invite creativity in how they're styled. A few outdoor cushions, a light throw blanket, or even a small side table nearby for tea or a book can turn them into a personal retreat. Positioning them to face a view, whether it's your flower beds, a pond, or just a cluster of potted plants, makes them a place where you naturally want to linger. The magic of these pieces isn't just in their comfort, but in the way they shift your pace. A swing's gentle motion slows your thoughts. A hammock cradles you until the edges of the day blur. And in a rustic garden, they become timeless, always ready to hold you when you need a moment of stillness, yet always part of the life and laughter that fills the space. There's a reason clay pots have been used for centuries. They're simple, sturdy, and beautiful in their honesty. In a rustic garden, they bring a grounded, earthy quality that feels both practical and charming. Whether they're lined up neatly along a path or scattered casually among the flower beds, clay pots seem to belong wherever you place them. I once visited a friend's mountain cottage where the front steps were flanked by stacks of terracotta pots in all sizes. Some were new and smooth, others weathered with moss growing along the rims. Each held something different: a pot of fragrant basil, a cluster of red geraniums, a spill of trailing ivy. She told me she loved how they aged naturally, gaining more personality each season without any effort at all. Clay pots are also wonderfully versatile. They suit every plant, from herbs and succulents to small trees and roses. They're easy to rearrange, making it simple to refresh your garden's layout or move plants into better sunlight. For those with limited mobility, grouping them at table height on a bench or shelf saves bending, and smaller pots can be carried one at a time without strain. Their porous nature means clay pots breathe, allowing moisture to evaporate more quickly than in plastic containers, a benefit for plants that prefer drier roots like lavender or rosemary. Over time, they develop a soft patina of mineral deposits and moss that blends beautifully with a rustic setting. You can even encourage this aged look by rubbing the surface with yogurt or moss slurry, letting nature do the rest. Mixing shapes and sizes adds depth and interest. A tall pot with a small olive tree can anchor a grouping, while smaller pots filled with pansies or thyme fill in around it. You can also use clay pots in creative ways as candle holders for outdoor tables, stacked into vertical planters or tipped on their sides to let flowers spill out as if they've escaped their container. What I love most about clay pots is their ability to age gracefully. Like the best rustic garden elements, they only get better with time. A chip here, a crack there, nothing that lessens their usefulness, but rather something that adds to their story. And when you pass by a grouping of them, warm from the sun and alive with blooms, you can't help but feel a quiet connection to gardeners who've done the same for generations. Few sights are as enchanting as a wall or fence draped in green vines or flowering branches. Climbing roses and ivy can transform a plain structure into something straight out of a countryside painting, softening harsh lines and weaving your garden together with color and texture. In a rustic space, they lend a sense of age and permanence, as if the plants have been there for decades, quietly watching the seasons pass. I once visited an old stone cottage where the front wall was almost entirely hidden by blush pink climbing roses. In early summer, the blooms tumbled over themselves in clouds of petals, their scent carrying on the breeze. The owner told me the roses had been planted by her grandmother, and she never pruned them too strictly, preferring their wild, generous growth. Around the back, ivy had claimed an entire section of the wall, its leaves shifting from deep green in summer to rich red in autumn. Climbing plants are perfect for adding vertical beauty without taking up much ground space. Roses bring romance and fragrance, while ivy offers evergreen coverage year-round. Both can disguise worn fences, old sheds, or even an unattractive wall, making them part of the garden's charm rather than an eyesore. For those with limited mobility training, these plants along a trellis or wire frame at chest height makes tending them easier, reducing the need to bend or reach high. When choosing climbing roses, look for varieties known for vigor and fragrance, such as New Dawn or Eden. They're forgiving and reward you with abundant blooms. Ivy, on the other hand, is nearly maintenance-free once established, though it's wise to keep it trimmed so it doesn't overtake nearby plants. Supporting structures can be as rustic as you like: a simple wooden trellis, an old iron gate, or even a repurposed ladder leaned against a wall. Over time, the plants will weave themselves into the frame, creating a living piece of art. And if you want a seasonal shift, you can plant clematis alongside your roses, so when one finishes blooming, the other takes its place. What I love about climbing plants is how they change the feeling of a space. A bare wall becomes a backdrop for life. A fence turns into a storybook boundary. And each year, as the roses return or the ivy deepens in color, you're reminded that beauty can grow slowly, quietly, and without fanfare, yet still take your breath away. There's a deep satisfaction in surrounding yourself with pieces that bear the mark of human hands. Handmade pottery and ceramics bring that feeling into the garden in a way few other materials can. Their subtle imperfections, the slight ripple in a glaze, the way a lip curves, just so add warmth and individuality that mass-produced items can't match. In a rustic space, they blend beautifully with woodstone and greenery, lending texture and artistry to the simplest corners. I once visited a potter's home in the countryside where every planter, bird bath, and decorative bowl had been shaped on a wheel just a few yards away in her workshop. Some were smooth and glossy in soft earth tones, while others bore textured patterns pressed from leaves and flowers before firing. She told me she never aimed for perfection, only for pieces that felt like they belonged outdoors. A wide, shallow bowl planted with moss sat on her porch railing, catching the morning dew. A tall, narrow vase held cut stems of foxglove and delphinium by her garden gate. In your own garden, handmade ceramics can take many forms. Planters' urns, water bowls for birds, or even sculptural accents tucked among the plants. For those who like to change their displays with the seasons, ceramics are easy to move and rearrange. Smaller pieces can be grouped on tables or shelves, while larger ones can anchor a corner or frame an entryway. If you don't make pottery yourself, local markets and craft fairs are wonderful sources for one-of-a-kind finds. Each piece you bring home carries not only its own charm, but also the story of its maker. And because ceramics come in a wide range of sizes and weights, you can choose items that are easy for you to handle. One of the loveliest things about pottery in the garden is how it weathers. Over time, glazes soften unglazed surfaces, gather a light film of moss, and the colors mellow under sun and rain. Instead of losing their appeal, they gain a quiet elegance that feels right at home in a rustic setting. Handmade pottery is more than just decoration. It's a bridge between the natural and the human-made. The clay comes from the earth, shaped by skill and care, then returned to the open air to live among flowers, trees, and soil. When you place such a piece in your garden, you're adding not just beauty, but a little piece of someone's craft and spirit, making your space all the richer for it. The textures we bring into our gardens matter just as much as the plants themselves. Natural fabrics like burlap, linen, and cotton add a softness that balances stone, wood, and metal. In a rustic garden, these textiles not only look beautiful, but also feel inviting, encouraging you to settle in and stay a while. I once visited a friend's back porch where the seating was dressed in linen slipcovers, the cushions wrapped in faded floral cotton, and the table draped with a simple burlap runner. The mix felt casual, yet thoughtful, as if the fabrics had been gathered over time from different places. She told me some were repurposed from old curtains and tablecloths, while others had been picked up at thrift shops. Nothing matched perfectly, and that was the charm. The colors and textures felt as natural as the breeze drifting through. Burlap is especially versatile outdoors. It can be used for table runners, potted plant wraps, or even as a breathable cover to protect seedlings from harsh sun. Linen brings a touch of elegance with its soft drape and muted tones, perfect for cushions or shade cloths over a pergola. Cotton, sturdy yet soft, works well for picnic blankets, slipcovers, and decorative pillows that can be swapped out seasonally. For those with limited mobility, these fabrics are easy to work with. They're lightweight, simple to wash, and can be layered to create comfort without heavy lifting. A single cotton throw over a chair can transform it into a cozy reading spot, while a burlap cloth over a pot instantly gives it a rustic facelift. Natural fabrics also age gracefully. Sunlight will fade them, rain will soften them, and over time they take on the relaxed look that suits a rustic garden perfectly. And because they're breathable, they stay comfortable to the touch even in warm weather, unlike some synthetic materials. If you enjoy crafting, these fabrics offer endless possibilities. You might sew simple cushion covers from old tablecloths, stitch a set of napkins from linen remnants, or make a casual hammock from sturdy cotton canvas. Even without sewing, you can drape burlap as a backdrop for potted plants, or tie strips of fabric to a trellis for a touch of color and movement in the wind. In a rustic garden, natural fabrics do more than decorate, they soften the space, making it feel like an extension of your home. They invite you to sit, to touch, and to linger. And in the quiet moments, with the fabric brushing your fingertips and the garden humming softly around you, you'll know that comfort can be as simple as a well-placed piece of cloth. One of the simplest ways to give your garden a rustic, harmonious feel is through color. Muted, earthy tones, soft greens, warm browns, gentle creams, and dusky blues blend seamlessly with the natural world. These colors don't shout. They whisper, creating a peaceful backdrop where flowers, textures, and stories can shine. I once visited a hillside garden where every element seemed to belong together without being overly matched. The wooden benches had faded to silvery gray. The clay pots wore a pale blush of mineral stains, and the painted trellis was a soft sage green. Even the cushions on the chairs were in mellow hues of oatmeal and dusty rose. The effect was calming, as though the entire garden had been painted with a single gentle brush stroke. Choosing an earthy palette doesn't mean your garden will lack vibrancy. Instead, it lets your plants take center stage while everything else supports them quietly. Think of a backdrop of warm beige or muted gray against which bright zinnias or golden marigolds can truly glow. Weathered terracotta, unpainted wood, and soft textured fabrics all contribute to this layered, natural look. For those updating existing furniture or planters, a coat of matte paint in a muted tone can transform them instantly. Sage green, soft taupe, or even a smoky blue can tone down shiny finishes and help them settle into the landscape. You might also introduce color through accessories, cushions, table linens, or even painted signs, choosing shades that feel like they belong to the earth rather than standing apart from it. This palette is also forgiving. Dirt and wear blend in naturally, making it easier to keep things looking tidy without constant upkeep. Over time, sun and weather will soften the colors, further enhancing the rustic character. If mobility is a concern, this approach is especially helpful because it focuses more on thoughtful choices than on heavy physical changes. Simply swapping out a few bold, modern colors for softer, nature-inspired ones can change the atmosphere of your garden without major effort. Muted, earthy tones also create a sense of continuity. Whether you're looking from the porch, walking along a path, or glancing out a window, the garden feels like one connected, flowing space. And when you sit down in the middle of it, all surrounded by shades that echo the soil, the leaves in the sky at dusk, you feel anchored, part of something bigger and more enduring than a single season. In a world that often pushes for perfection, there's something freeing about letting a garden loosen its edges. Rustic charm thrives in a space that's a little untamed, where daisies lean into the path, where herbs spill over their containers, and where the grass grows just tall enough to sway in the wind. A slightly wild garden feels alive, like it's breathing alongside you. I once visited an elderly couple's property on the outskirts of town. Their flower beds were full, but not manicured foxgloves, mingled with hollyhocks, lavender pushed against the borders, and a few volunteer sunflowers stood tall where seeds had fallen the year before. The husband told me they never pulled every weed, believing some added texture and even helped attract pollinators. As we walked, butterflies flitted past and bees worked lazily among the blooms. It was less like a display and more like stepping into a shared space between people and nature. Allowing your garden to be a little wild doesn't mean abandoning it. It means guiding rather than controlling, planting in clusters instead of neat rows, letting climbers wander and mixing flowers with vegetables for a lived-in cottage feel. Wild edges can soften fences, fill in gaps, and welcome birds, bees, and other small visitors. For gardeners with limited mobility, this approach can be a gift. It reduces the pressure of constant upkeep, and instead of worrying about every stray stem, you can enjoy the beauty of what grows naturally. A self-seeding corner with wildflowers, a patch of clover in the lawn, or even a row of herbs allowed to bloom can make your garden richer in both life and color. The joy of a slightly wild garden is in its surprises. A plant might bloom earlier than expected, or a new flower might appear from a seed carried by the wind. These small gifts keep the garden feeling fresh and full of possibility. In the end, a rustic garden is less about control and more about connection. Letting it grow a little wild means letting it express itself, and in doing so, you may find it reflects something true about you too. Life, after all, is more beautiful when it's not perfectly trimmed. Dear friend, as we've wandered together through these ideas from weathered wood and wildflowers to lantern light and soft fabrics, I hope you've begun to picture not just a garden, but a sanctuary. Rustic beauty isn't about perfection or matching every piece. It's about layers of life memory and care coming together to create a place that feels wholly your own. A rustic garden welcomes the old and the new in equal measure. An inherited clay pot, a thrifted bench, a handful of seeds scattered along a stone path, each element adds its own thread to the story. Over time, they weave together into something far richer than anything planned on paper. And the best part, you don't need endless energy or a big budget to create it. You just need a willingness to look at what's around you with fresh eyes and a little imagination. I've met gardeners in their 80s who work in short bursts, planting a few pots at a time, and others who prefer to simply sit among their blooms, watching the birds they've welcomed. Both have created spaces that speak of love and care. That's the heart of rustic gardening. It grows with you, adapting to your pace, your seasons, your joys. So as you look out at your own outdoor space, whether it's a sprawling yard or a small balcony, think of what could make it feel more like home. Maybe it's a lantern that flickers at dusk, a wooden crate brimming with herbs, or a patch of wildflowers that hum with bees in the summer. Start there and let your garden tell its own story. Your hands, no matter their age, still have the power to create beauty. Every pot you plant, every chair you place, every sign you hang becomes part of something living. And each time you step outside, you'll find not just a garden, but a reflection of your own heart and history waiting for you. Until next time, happy gardening, dear friend. May your days be filled with warm light, gentle breezes, and the quiet joy of watching life grow.